It's just preparing the live stream now. It takes a minute for it to kind of go, and I'll let you know when we're good.
All right.
But yeah, everything is good here. It's sort of surprising that
how are things?
All right. We're live now.
Awesome.
We are live. So I'm just gonna throw a thumbnail up here and then we can get started.
All right, hold on. I'm gonna start my voice memo. There we go.
Just so people know what we're seeing. All right. Got that live with David Ryan Harris. And let me just put this thumbnail up there and then we'll be ready to go. I guess I probably should have asked you for the most current photo that you wanted us to use of you, but I think he the other guy that helps me with all this stuff, he took the liberty of finding us one that has you with your 330.
It's just fine.
Okay, good. All right. Cool. All right, it's just uploading the thumbnail and then we'll be ready to go.
Sweet. Let me turn off notifications. Sweet.
Notifications are off. Yeah, but
notifications are off. The only notifications that will happen now will be real notifications when some kid bursts in here.
When some kid bursts in there. Yeah, it's invariably going to happen, right?
Yeah, it's a new normal.
Cool. All right, got that all saved up. We're good. All right. So, David Ryan Harris, thank you so much for coming and joining me today. Of course, I guess we've probably known each other for, I don't know, 10 years, maybe close to that, something like that.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Yeah. I actually remember the very first time that I ever saw you was at Slim's in San Francisco in like the early 2000s. I think I was actually in high school.
You know, I think I only played Slim's. Oh no, I'm thinking about Yoshi's. I'm thinking about Yoshi's. I had when people talk about shows and autographs, I have this like crazy San Francisco story. Is Yoshi still there?
Yoshi's is there. The one in San Francisco is gone, but the one that's in Oakland is still there. The original Yoshi's is still there.
Got you. I'd only played the one in San Francisco. Well, now that I've started it, this has nothing to do with Slim's, but since I'm talking about where you are, so I did this. I played at Yoshi's one time, and I did this meet and greet after, and I had people come, and I was signing CDs, and I was there for a while, and so like after I've been there for like 10 minutes, I had like one couple come back and they said, "Hey, I'm sorry. I know you told us not to touch the thing, but we rubbed it off. Can you sign it again?" So I was like, yeah. And then it happened like maybe 5, 6, 7 times throughout the course of me sitting there for an hour. So we get done with the whole meet and greet, and I'm kind of just kicking it with the staff, having like a drink or something, and I'm kind of flipping this pen in my hand, and I look down, and I have been signing all these autographs in dry erase marker.
Oh, nice. Expo.
Yeah, exactly.
So markers, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I guess the same is true for you know, I don't know if this was ever a prank that people used to do when you were in school, but a lot of times at our school, people would substitute Sharpies for the Expo markers. So when the substitute would go and write on the whiteboard.
Oh yeah.
You'd be writing in permanent marker.
Kids are awful.
That's a fun one.
Yeah.
My wife is a principal, so she's seen all those tricks.
For sure.
Yeah. So today, I think one of the things I want to talk about is sort of, your career, and you know, I've listened to a lot of the interviews. I kind of spent a little bit this week listening to some of the other interviews that are out there on podcasts. So I'll try to not be redundant. And since this is such a gear centric interpretation, hopefully there's not very much overlap, and you don't feel like I'm just asking you the same questions that you've answered 1,000 times.
Right.
But I want to go kind of all the way back to kind of the beginning of your professional career. And I think a lot of people, I mean, maybe probably your fans know this, but you know, follow for now. What was that like? That was early 90s, right? Like maybe
it was late 80s, early 90s. I think started in like 87 or so, 87, 88.
Yeah. And so during that time, kind of beginning of your career, kind of what was like, how would I want to kind of take a snapshot of sort of the initial David Ryan Harris tone, and then we can kind of follow that evolution to what you have now. And then
I mean, it's in some regards, it's kind of come full circle, because at that point, I didn't really know a lot about being in bands, and we didn't have as many resources about how to get your favorite guitarist's tone or whatever. So I was trying to do everything with one guitar and one rig. And by everything, I mean from, you know, Prince kind of, you know, funky telly tones to like, I really love Jamie West Oram, who's in this band called The Fix, and Andy Summers, to that kind of shimmery stuff. There was a little bit of that, but then there was also, I love Stevie Ray Vaughan, and I love Kim Thale, and, you know, trying to do all of that stuff with one guitar, one rig, partially because that's all I could afford. And I didn't really know the whole concept of trying to, you know, have multiple rigs or whatever for that kind of thing. And so, in a lot of ways, I guess I just ended up with a tone that was completely unique because of the soup I was trying to make out of all of that stuff. But I had some horrible rigs back in the day for sure, and some good ones too.
And in the horrible rigs, was it just because it wasn't assembled well, or was it just because like the combination of that soup were incompatible spices, so to speak?
Well, there was a period of time where I thought that I could do it with a solid state rig. So let's just start there. I think I had one of those little GK rig with like 2 6s in it or something. And I, you know, just trying to piece all of this stuff together and like do it with things that I could afford. And yeah, I mean, just trying to piece stuff together. And in 1 minute it would work. And I remember I went as far as having like, Groove Tubes had this thing, I think it was called a solo system, where you could get power amp and put whatever power amps in it, and then you get this like preamp. It was called the Trio.
Yeah, it had, kind of like modules, right?
Well, I think you're talking about the Seymour Duncan convertible. The Trio was like just 2 different pieces. One was like a pre-head, and then the other was like a power amp. But I was really into this guitar player named Tres Manos, who played with this band, Urban Dance Squad. He had one. So yeah, I mean, I got super complicated then. I had like a MIDI switcher rig at one point. It was just like pedals and cables and shit everywhere. And then ultimately it was like, you know what, I think I'm gonna, now the pedals are actually better. The number of options that people have now for sort of tone searching and getting it all to fit on the pedal board is phenomenal compared to then.
Yeah. When in all those old MIDI switcher rigs, were those ones that you built, or did you hire somebody to do that?
I did it all myself. I was too broke to have anybody do it myself. And I think it was a PV rig. It was definitely a PV switcher. I mean, a PV floor thing. I don't remember if the rack was a PV thing.
Are you in Atlanta at that time?
Yes.
So I mean, PV was the hometown hero, right? Aren't they?
I mean, they were close at hand. I mean, you know, they were a distant second, of course, to like Fender. But some of those, like, what was the Tweed, the PV Classic or something?
The Classic 30 or the
Yeah, I definitely had one of those at one point, and they had a really cool head that Kim Thale used to play. I can't remember the name of it, but it had these dip switches on the front of it. So, you know, there was a music store in Atlanta called Clark Music, and the guy Bob that worked there, and this other guy that became a friend of mine, Paige Waldrop, you know, they were so used to seeing me walk in the door with like, hey, I want to trade these things and try to get, you know, try to get this other thing. What can I get for this? And like, you know, dumping all the stuff on the counter. You know, always been like an incessant tinkerer, just trying to get this thing in my head, or really trying to just keep myself from being bored. Because some of the stuff I can go back and listen to, you know, and I'm like, man, that sounds amazing. What was I playing through? But I know at the time I thought my tone was terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the first like nice guitar that you ever had?
The first nice guitar I had, wow. I mean, I had this Ibanez Artist.
Uh-huh.
That was a nice guitar at first, but I actually thought it was a little too nice. It was black, and I was like, oh, I wanna sand all the paint off of it and have it be natural. And so it started out kind of nice, but I ruined it.
What about first nice amp? I mean, I guess PV is not bad. What was like
Man,
your
I'm gonna
first?
tell you, one of the nicest amps I had early in my career, like in the Follow for Now days. So I had this, I had a Bassman reissue, and I had whatever the PV 410 kind of copy of that was. And we were touring through Mississippi, and we went to this this music store. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Brothers Music. And they had a Matchless. Matchless had just kind of come out, been up for a couple years. And they had this Matchless 410 combo. And I played through that, and I loved it. I mean, now looking back, the EL84 thing was not appropriate for punk music at all. But it sounded super pro. Yeah. But there was no way I could afford this amp. And so I just went to the guy and I was like, hey man, how much do you want for this amp? You know, and he was like, tell me how much you want it for. And I was like, oh, I wish I could trade something. He's like, well, you know, what do you have to trade? So I told him, you know, I have these two amps, and these two amps, like brand new, were still like half of what, you know, he wanted for this Matchless amp. And he was like, you know what, man, I can sell those two amps before I can sell this amp here in Mississippi. So if you go get them out of the trailer, I'll trade you. And so I was like, get these amps out of the trailer. So I traded those two amps for this one Matchless, and I really love that amp. Fast forward a few years later, I moved to LA, and was broke.
Is this the Doyle Burnhall story?
Yes. So I moved here. I was broke. I think we needed rent money, and it was like the nicest thing that I had. So I took it down to True Tone and sold it, and found out later, I think they only made 4 this particular amp. And yes, I was on the phone with Doyle as I was driving down to trade the amp. My car broke down on the way. It's horrible.
It was divine intervention. They were trying to give you a sign.
I tried to look for that amp to try to find another one, but I haven't been able to find one.
Yeah. So it goes, you know. Some of those deals we've all had. Was that the biggest sort of regret that you sold?
Yeah, I mean, that I can think. I'm sure the guitars that I've had over the years that I wish that I could have back. It's just like a American made Strat that I played for a lot of Follow for Now time. Somebody stole. I wish I had that guitar back, and there was nothing special about it. It wasn't vintage. It was just like the first Strat I ever had, and I really, really love that guitar.
It'd be vintage now.
Yeah, true.
90 Strats are now in the vintage pool. Are those sort of bizarre? Remember that transition where like Fender had kind of like, it was still sort of the same headstock shape, but it was like that transition in the 80s where they kind of modified it slightly.
Yeah,
like those fetch like $3,000 now sometimes.
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Keep everything.
Yeah. Keep everything. Yeah. Well, unless you need rent money, right?
It's true.
Then you're there. And so Follow for Now, and so that was that. So the tail end of that was Matchless.
The tail end, yeah, definitely Matchless. Yeah.
And then by the time you started, when did Brand New Immortals take over? Like what?
It was a few years after.
Okay.
And in that period of time. I had a Sound City amp that I really love, the Sound City 50. And I was playing this Les Paul Deluxe that
a gold top one.
No, it's like a wine. I actually just sold it on Reverb.
Oh yeah, actually, I think I remember seeing you play this before. Yeah. You sold that one, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I love that guitar. I just didn't play it very much, and I kind of feel like I'm not a collector. I don't really want to be a collector, and it's if having guitars, if guitars are kind of like your children, to have a child that you leave in the case and put in the closet just seems kind of weird. So I just try to get rid of stuff that I don't play very much.
So don't abuse your children.
Exactly.
Sell them to new families. So and then it was when you had gone to Brand New Immortals, were you still using the? Obviously, you sold the Matchless probably by that point, and so you were using Marshalls at that.
No. I still Brand New Immortals started. I was still in Atlanta, so I didn't. I still had the Matchless. Okay. You know, we didn't actually play that many shows. Brand New Immortals probably played 30 shows. It was primarily a studio kind of creation, and the two guys that I was in the band with also owned a backline company.
Okay.
Which is still in Atlanta, Avatar Events Group. So I kind of had access to all sorts of stuff for shows. I mean, I was particularly fond of that Sound City amp, and I probably used a super loud twin at the time,
right?
For the few shows that we did. We went out with this band called Tantric. There wasn't a whole lot of live stuff with Brand New Immortals. It was primarily studio stuff.
But you guys had a record deal.
Yeah, for sure. We got signed by Lars Ulrich from Metallica. He had a label through Elektra.
Okay.
We did a 5-song EP called Pistons, Protein, and Afro Sheen. And there was a song on it called Reasons Why. At the time, this woman, Leslie Fram, who is now at CMT, she was a program director at 99X, which was the alternative station in Atlanta, and she was the #1 PD in the country. Mm-hmm. And somehow Johnny, our bass player, had a meeting with her, maybe that the afternoon that people were kind of doing their pitches or whatever to try to get stuff added. She heard that song. She was like, I don't know what this is, but I'm adding this song. So all of a sudden, this band that doesn't have a record deal gets a song added to the #1, to the #1 PD in the country's playlist. So people kind of went nuts and like a little bit of a bidding war trying to sign the band. And we thought Lars, we really liked Lars's pitch, and Elektra seemed like a good fit for us.
And so was it fruitful, or what? Was there things that you would have done differently had you known what you know now?
It was everything about that band and that experience was super transitional, because I was coming from, I've been in this punk rock band. I had gotten married and then divorced. I was sober at the time. I was trying to figure out how to piece all these things together into like a new life. I think OK Computer had just come out, and I was just really fascinated by trying to marry these two worlds of like computer recording. And, I really came up loving things that were very tactile and like organic. So that could be, Hendrix stuff, or like Cream, and loving all like, the real deal stuff, but then also loving all of these like weird sounds and computer recording that you were able to do. So all of that just was a really weird, just me trying to find myself time. So the band getting signed and doing their thing. I don't think we put it this way. When the band, when Lars decided he didn't want to be a label president anymore and he was going to fold the label, we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, I mean, that was cool. Like, we weren't like a real band that like slugged it out in a 15-passenger van and,
Right.
So we were just kind of like, that was fun. And, I think that record is, listening to it now, I think the record's badass.
Yeah, it's badass. Reasons Why is awesome.
That was fun.
Yeah, and I've heard you, of course, do an acoustic rendition of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Yeah, it's cool. There's actually like some old footage on YouTube of you guys playing like a huge like festival.
Oh God. Oh, the Voodoo Fest, maybe?
I don't know. It's one of them. I don't think maybe Reasons Why is on there.
Yeah.
What did you play that kind of opening riff on, or was I'm assuming it was you that played it
Yeah. I think on the record it was probably the Les Paul Deluxe.
into the Matchless or the Sound City?
It was either the Matchless or it was one of those little cigarette amps
Oh, really?
powering this. So I used that a bunch for that record, powering this orange 412 cabinet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sleeper tone right there.
Yeah.
The solid state tone.
Yeah, but it was probably the Sound City, because that was my jam at the time.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. And then what year was it that it kind of dissolved with Brand New Immortals?
Man, I think that record came out 99 or 2000, and it was really, I think we were together signed on Elektra for 8 months, 10 months, maybe a year.
Yeah.
So like 2001 or so, the band we got dropped, and the band just sort of dissolved. We didn't even talk about making another record.
Right. And what year did you move to LA?
2002.
Okay, so when you were doing Brand New Immortals, that was around the time that you got connected through Eddie's Attic and with John Mayer and all that stuff.
A little bit prior, I think. Yeah, John and I met just before Brand New Immortals kind of got started. I was kind of doing the acoustic stuff. For me was brand new. Like I didn't start out playing acoustic guitar. I didn't get acoustic guitar until like 3/4 of the way through Follow for Now, and I certainly didn't consider myself a singer songwriter. So I'd done a few shows just because I think somebody asked me to do one, and I put out this solo record on Columbia in '97, which is how I think John got to know about my music. And so I would play,
that record.
Say it again.
What were some of the songs on that record? Any stuff that you're playing now?
I believe If I Had a Dime was on that record.
Okay.
And I was signed by Brendan O'Brien, who produced almost all the Stone Temple Pilots records. He mixed Super Unknown. He did 3 or 4 or 5 Pearl Jam records, a few Rage records. So he had his own label through Columbia. So I think I was there. Michael Penn was there. A couple other people. So, but the record was kind of all over the place. I don't think Columbia really knew what to do with it. So Brendan decided, I like making records. I don't necessarily like having to sell them. So I'm going to fold this label and bounce. You can either hang out here and try to figure out what to do at Columbia, or I can give you some money and you can walk. Yeah. And I was like, I'm going to take the money and walk. But so John heard that record. Legend has it, he heard that record when he was at Berkeley. He and Matt Mangano hanging out. And so when he moved to Atlanta, it was like, oh, I got to meet that guy that did that record. So
yeah, nice. Do you guys ever have any crossover on gigs where you guys were like scheduled in the same lineup, like on a singer-songwriter showcase or anything like that?
We would play lots of rounds together. Like we would do kind of Writer in the Rounds things together a lot.
Yeah. So once you moved to LA, what was sort of like what was the kind of the first kind of thing that you landed here gig wise?
Man, so I moved out here. This friend of mine was good friends with the Neville Brothers, and he was supposed to produce this Neville Brothers record, and we were going to do it together. So I saved up enough money to make it for a couple months in LA with no other money coming in. And then I figured I'd be done with this Neville Brothers record. I have some money and that would, get me to the next gig. And we moved out here, and the Neville Brothers thing ended up not happening. So that's when I got broke and had to sell my Matchless. And really, man, I give great credit. The thing that really kind of kept me afloat, like the biggest lifeline, was this song that I did in the Biker Boys.
with Lawrence Fishburne.
Lawrence Fishburne. Yeah, I just signed a publishing deal before I moved out here, and they were, trying to figure out what to do with me. I was trying to figure out how to go about writing songs for and with other people, and I got a call from my publisher about doing a song for this movie, and they kind of gave me the directive. At this point, I was literally, we had eviction notices, and I did this song, like my first draft of the song. They were like, we really love it, we really love it, we just need you to change this one thing. So I changed this one thing, and it wasn't enough money to retire on, but it was definitely enough money for me to kind of get my bearings and pay a couple bills and figure out what the next step was going to be for me.
That was "Don't Look Down," right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great song.
And playing shows here in town, the Hotel Cafe here in town was kind of welcomed me with open arms, for no real reason. I mean, I don't know anybody there. They just Marco, the guy, one of the owners of the club, kind of gave me a place to play, and really it became my second life, which is kind of what I wanted it to be. Because when I moved out here, I think I was early 30s, mid 30s, and just really looking for a way to kind of reinvent myself. And I found that Atlanta, a lot of people in Atlanta sort of knew me as being this one person where I wanted to be something slightly different. So I just kind of started that thing, early 2000s, and started, John and I remained friends. And just as I was moving out, Room for Squares was kind of, doing its thing. And we didn't stay in touch, like talk on the phone on a regular basis, but whenever I was in town, we were same place, same time, we would always kind of hang out. And he offered me a gig. It's like, hey man, if you ever want to just come out, hang out, ride the bus, play guitar and sing, there's always a spot for you. So yeah, that's how my gig with him materialized.
What was the first tour that you actually did with John?
We did like a little tour between Room for Squares and Heavier Things. I think more than anything, just to kind of work out the songs before we went in the studio for Heavier Things. Mm-hmm. So we did maybe 4 or 5 shows. I think we may have played Jazz Fest, mm-hmm. But just a few shows. I think, yeah, that wasn't really a proper tour, but that was the first batch of shows.
Yeah, I think the first time I saw the John live, Maroon 5 was opening for him.
Right.
And I remember Michael Chavez was playing the guitar.
Yeah.
And I remember backstage that they were recording something for like a live album that they were putting out, like a compilation of live dates during the Heavier Things tour. And I remember Chad was pulling his hair out because there was some issue with like the mixing board at the Shoreline Amphitheater, and they were trying to figure out what it was.
Right.
And I asked him about it recently, and he kind of was like, "Oh man, that was such a nightmare." And I guess it was a memorable show because of how hard it was to capture those recordings, because they released some sort of I think it was 10 show dates that they recorded live or something like that.
Yeah, we did. I think they called it As Is. I was there for I think I was there for that.
You were at Shoreline?
Yeah, I mean for part of that tour. Actually, now that I think about it, I think I did some sporadic shows before I did my first full tour. Was after Heavier Things. So the first little few shows that I did, I would just come hang out for a few days and then leave and go do other stuff. So my first official tour was post Heavier Things, when Heavier Things came out, I think.
Yeah. So Continuum then was like the first tour one that you were doing, like all the dates.
No, Heavier Things was the first one. So after Heavier Things came out, I did from then on, except for the Born and Raised tour.
Yeah. Well, those are, I mean, the live shows are just incredible. I love somebody was actually commenting here as we're going about the Prince intros that you do as the lead in to Slow Dancing.
Right.
How did that come about?
I think John was just like, he's really good about kind of spreading the love and kind of letting everybody do their thing. And I think he was just like, hey man, if there's a spot that you want to do something, let's find a spot where you can kind of showcase and do something. And then initially it started, I was doing this Lewis Taylor song, Lucky,
Yeah.
before slow dancing. And it was just trying to find something that musically or lyrically sort of matched the sentiment or match the scene of slow dancing in a burning room without it actually being so super on the nose.
Yeah.
And then just make sure that it was in a key that would be complimentary or whatever. So at first it was the Lewis Taylor Lucky thing, which I did for maybe 2 years, and then started doing the Prince thing just because I'm a huge Prince fan and it just works really well leading into slow dancing.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad that somebody had brought that up. Another quick aside of a question that had come in on Instagram. Somebody asked what the rig is that you used on Where the Light Is.
Somebody asked me on my Instagram live yesterday if that was a Friedman. It was not a Friedman. It was a Metropolis. It was a
Yeah, I don't think
100-watt super bass replica.
Okay, yeah, I don't think Friedman was doing amps at the commercial level like he is now at that time anyway.
Yeah, so it was a
Metro.
Yeah, the only reason I know that's what, like, if you just full stop asked me what I used on that, I'd be like, I have no idea. But because A, it was recorded, and B, he said Friedman, I was like, oh, that's probably the Metropolis. Which
Yeah.
I really loved that. I love that rig. I just kind of wanted something smaller for when I was off the road.
Yeah.
Because I can't use a 100-watt super bass for anything that I do outside of that.
Well, now you got your attenuator inside your aux box.
Exactly.
You can use anything.
This is true.
The world is your oyster. How do you use the aux box on the live performance? Because the last couple, I guess the last maybe 2 times I've seen you on tour, you've been using that. How are you using the attenuation? Or are you using it for front of house stuff, or how are you using it?
It's really helpful for me in a couple ways. If I'm switching out pedals, which I'm often want to do, but we got techs on stage, or we get to sound check and sound check's over, they're opening doors, or I gotta be quiet. I'm able to like kind of mess around with my pedals by obviously just fully attenuating the amp. So that's always been great. But I also use it to feed my ears.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my special sauce thing. The mics go to the front of house, and I have some mics in my ears. But if I need a little bit more, instead of me having to talk to my monitor guy, I can just run over and just via the line out, turn myself up. Or if I feel like the room is a little dead, I can turn that room up, which sounds amazing. So that's how I'm using it live.
Nice. Yeah, what did people do before the aux box? We don't know.
I have no idea.
I remember you had an ultimate attenuator back in the day.
I did.
Remember that?
I did. I think Doyle had one, and we spoke about it. And he really loved it. It's all trying to figure out how to tame that 100-watt super bass kind of thing. To get it to where it's like humming, kind of just right, and it's just about to get that bloom, but at a reasonable volume.
He doesn't seem like an attenuator type of guy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't. I remember the first time I saw him with Archangels. I think he had 2 twins, like everything on 10. It was so loud.
Yeah, I remember when I saw him play at Yoshi's, and he had 2 twins on stage, and I remember the sound guys were like, concerned about how that was going to go, because Yoshi's is such a small club in Oakland.
Yeah,
having 2 twins on stage in like a power trio setting. I remember at Yoshi's, in fact, when I went and saw Eric Johnson, they made him put back his 412s. And
really?
Yeah, and he had like a B rig, which was like a half size rig. So it was, instead of the 412s with the super leads, it was blues breakers for the Marshall thing, and then he had deluxe reverbs instead of the twins.
Right.
And they made him like bring that out. And so I remember the guy like hauling off with a dolly all the 412s back into their bus or whatever they were traveling, and then bringing in the B rig
The
because
B rig,
too much for that room.
no doubt.
Yeah, but it sounded really good. But yeah, I just remember that, and yeah, thinking about Doyle with the attenuator seems like the antithesis of his sound. But
Yeah, I don't think that phase lasted very long.
you got to experiment though to know. Has there been any pieces of gear on your rig that you feel like have been revolving, or like have been not revolving doors, but have been pretty stationary? Like you've always had X in the rig?
No.
No.
I mean, I feel like now, I feel like I will always have a, I love this Jackson Audio Prism.
Mm-hmm.
So like any kind of board I do for anything, if it's my acoustic thing, if it's, fly dates, my main rig, I feel like I always have one of those on. I think it's just really helpful and kind of, I feel like I could show up to any room with any kind of amp, and if I have that pedal, I can get something out of it that I like. But other than that, yeah, it's kind of always changing. I mean, there's some pedals that have just become kind of classics. I think everybody loves the Flint, which is great and super easy to operate. I'm kind of coming back around to the El Capistan as well. Just this kind of, desert island, ease of operation and juiciness of tone.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of, any kind of dirt stuff, I love, we've had long conversations about how much I love fuzz stuff. Isn't always appropriate on a mayor gig for me to have fuzz on my board. It's that kind of tone is just not very conducive to very much of his stuff, other than maybe some of the trio stuff, which I don't play on. So
Yeah. What about like I do this with all of the guests. I kind of ask them first of all if there's any sleeper pedals that you think that people should know about, that you've kind of like known about, that you think that are under the radar that people should be checking out.
I mean, I got to tell you, I think the Prism is the one. I mean, because it's not necessarily a distortion. It's got, just a few knobs on it. It's it just does so much stuff. It's like EQ. It just changes the character of whatever you have, and it's it does it in a way that's kind of clean. It's almost like a hi-fi approach to analog stuff. I can't really explain it, but I think that's a great sleeper pedal.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I like about that pedal, and I've had it a few times for people have brought it to me when I'm doing some of these pedal board videos and things like that. But the thing that I felt like it did really well is sort of like what the RC Booster was marketed as when it first came out.
Right.
And it's just a more refined and more controllable version of kind of what that did in just sort of like a cooler package. I mean, certainly the aesthetic of it is very cool. I like the folded aluminum enclosures and all that stuff. And I think that that they did a really good job at sort of being able to make something that can really help shape the tone. And be able to just become more neutral, if you need it to be that way.
Right.
Yeah. Any other sleepers for like delay or reverb or modulation or things like that?
Oh, you know what? Actually, this oh man, I don't want to tell people about this. The Digitech Expression Factory.
I've seen that on your rig. The
Man,
graphite colored one.
Yeah, it's so great. I think it's got one of the best rotaries in it. So I think the rotary is like a 9 or a 10. It's got 2 wahs in it. The wahs are probably like, I don't know, like 6 or 7. It also
that's out of 10.
Out of 10, yeah.
So it's like a
it also does like a whammy in it. The whammy's kind of okay, and I think it does a phaser, and it can also do a volume pedal thing. So it's like I would buy it for the rotary alone, but like for John's gig, I don't want to waste space on my board for a wah because I don't really use it that often. So to have a wah that's like a solid 6 or 7 in this same package is awesome. I wish it had different power, but in terms of being a sleeper pedal, it's its own proprietary thing. It's AC.
Okay. Is it 9 volt or 12 volt AC, or do you know?
I don't know. I know it's folded underneath this raggedy board I have right now. Like even Sharky's like, Sharky would like, he's walked over. In fact, I sold him one of mine because he was like, hey man, what's that you using for the rotary?
I'm looking it up right now. So it's the expression. I remember what it looks like, but I'm trying to remember the specs on it.
It's yeah, the EX7.
Yeah, I see it here. Expression factor. There's one used right now, $107 on Reverb.
I'm gonna get it as soon as I get off of here. Somebody didn't beat me to it.
Let's see. I wonder if it says. I wonder if it says the power though. Huh. Interesting. I bet it's. Let's see. It looks like it might be 9. It looks like it's 9-volt AC at 1 amp. Is what this site is saying.
Sure, I believe you.
So you could in the True Tone power supply could do it. The CS12 because it has that 9-volt AC output all the way on the right.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yep, I do.
Yeah, because I think it's otherwise it's like a switching supply, but it has that one AC output on it. But yeah, well there you go. This everybody's going to clear out Reverb, so you better get on there quick, David.
It's a really great pedal. Like I said, it's my favorite rotary of all the pedals.
More than the old Hughes and Kettner Rotosphere.
Got one of those too. I mean, the Rotosphere is great, but as you know, it is ginormous.
Yeah, but you gotta have the meat if you want to feel the heat. You gotta have the big one.
I guess so, man. If that's a huge part of your tone, like I guess you gotta.
All those old Charlie Hunters things were all that.
Yeah.
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 But I mean, Charlie didn't have, like on my board now, I think there's like 4 different distortions, 2 fuzzes. So, Charlie could relegate a bunch of space on his board for just that thing.
Huge thing. But he also had to carry around a bass amp and all that.
That's true. So you got to keep your pedal board tight.
Yeah. Just having. But I saw that he kind of went on hiatus for a while. But I noticed recently I've heard him use it a few times, or use something that had rotary.
Yeah.
He'd retired the rotary for a while. What about distortion pedals or overdrive pedals? Do you think are sleepers?
Oh man, I don't know if it's a sleeper necessarily, but I do love it. The Brown amplification, I think it's the name of the company. They make the
Protein.
The Protein.
Yeah, they're kind of ODR1 interpretation.
Yeah, the two sides of that on their own are really great, and they stack super great.
Yeah, I would say that is a sleeper pedal. I mean, I think JHS has talked about it a little bit in some of his stream stuff and things like that. But yeah, that is a great pedal. I remember when it was being developed, the guy who it's designed for, or it was supposed to be like a signature pedal, although I don't know how closely it's marketed as such, but I had some of the early renditions of it there as it was kind of coming together, building this rig, and it sounded really good. I think it is a great pedal.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I actually have this thing I had Josh from JHS build me, and it's essentially just a tiny little pedal with a volume pot in it. But I guess whatever the ohms or whatever of the load of this volume are the same as a guitar pot. So okay. I set that right next to my fuzz pedal.
Okay.
So I can click them both on at the same time, and I get this super sparkly thing like you do when you roll back the volume on your guitar, but it's just because I'm able to do it, and it's a sort of a preset rollback.
Right.
Is awesome. So I can go from clean tone, so I click those two things on at the same time. That's like clean, but just like a little bit of hair on it, and then click the volume pedal off, and you get the full fuzz.
Well, you're gonna dig the Vertex fuzz then, because I'm working on it right now with this guy named Paul Trombetta, and he's kind of like, I don't know, one of the real legacy sort of boutique fuzz guys out there. And we're doing a dual fuzz, germanium and silicon fuzz. So we haven't settled on what the transistor is going to be, because I don't want to go with like an NKT 275 or something like that, where at this point, if you can find one, it's sort of the bottom of the barrel. as far as the quality of it. It's been sorted by who knows how many different
Who
companies.
knows? Yeah.
So anyway, the idea is that you can have the silicon, you can have the germanium, and then there'll be a foot switch on it as well, in addition to the on off. That's kind of what we're calling like the kind of the Hendrix clean. And so
Right.
it does the same thing where it simulates that the loading of the volume pot of the 250K pot you rolled down so that you can get the cleanup mode, and you have a internal trim pot so you can set the point that you want it to trigger.
Oh, that's great. That's what's
Yeah,
up.
and then you can switch it between kind of like the Band of Gypsies era or the the earlier experienced version,
Yeah.
to either type. So that's pretty cool, and we'll probably be releasing it in a maybe 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. So
That's
I'll send you one
yeah.
of those to check out.
Sign me up. Yeah, I'm a huge Fuzz fan. I love the Fuzzes.
Yeah, they're great. They're great, especially with you know that Metropolis amp. Do you still have that one?
No, it's too big for me. Like now I'm all. I mean, I guess my studio rig. I don't think I have anything that's more than 30 watts. Everything is pretty low wattage. I mean, most of the stuff that I use on the road with Mayor just stays in storage. Once we come off the road, I have no, I have no use for those large amps. I was doing the 2 Rock stuff for this last run. I might bring one of those home, bring
Okay.
one of those heads home, just because nothing quite sounds like that amp.
Yeah, they're great amps.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're fantastic. Yeah, well, so those are. I think the real takeaway sleeper today was the rotary.
Yeah, for sure. That's
uh,
great. Oh, and it also has like, it also does, it has distortions in it. Like they kind of sound like OD1 kind of distortions.
okay, so like a Boss kind of distortion.
Yeah. That I think you activate by stepping all the way down on the heel. So in any of those, with any of those settings, if you the wah or the whammy, or they have this other thing called Space Station, which is pretty cool. It like it almost does a shimmer, but it just sounds it's not a smooth shimmer. It's like a OK Computer kind of shimmer.
No,
But you can, if you go all the way back on the pedal, it activates the distortion. This is a cool
nice.
pedal, man.
Yeah, I think reverbs.
Oh wait, you froze. Oh, there you are.
Okay, cool. We're good. Yeah, so we've talked about some sleeper gear. We've talked about the early days. We talked about brand new Immortals. Talked about Follow for Now. I think that the last thing I want to get into, just being conscientious of our time here, and respecting your time, most importantly, is be doing what it is that you do. You've kind of had this interesting roadmap to kind of the musician that you are today, but presumably, even if somebody's trying to follow, the cookbook recipe of David Ryan Harris's career and try to emulate that, it's almost impossible since the whole landscape of music has changed. What do you think is sort of what do you think is the pathway to kind of doing what you do, just doing Sideman thing, doing the solo artist thing? And I know that you had kind of your farewell tour here recently. um and so obviously you've even evolved in sort of kind of what it looks like, and continue to evolve. But what do you think is the pathway now to having a career in this?
It's all, well, not all. You have to have talent to a certain level of proficiency, but beyond, I don't know, I'm gonna say about a 60% level of actual proficiency at your instrument. A huge, a much larger portion than I think people realize is what happens when you're not playing. My whole thing is like relationship based. So I've been able to, without really trying to sit down and piece this together in a super deliberate fashion, I've been able to piece something together where the stuff that I do solo kind of feeds those things end up being sort of calling cards for like, oh, this is kind of some of the things that I'm able to do. I put those records out not as like a business card. I put them out because those are things and expressions that I want to make. But then that leads into relationships with people that like my songwriting or how I, put tracks together or whatever. I meet them, we hang out. Generally speaking, I'm a fairly engaging guy. I like to have conversations. I like to listen. I like to make people laugh. I like to, for people to know I'm paying attention to what it is that they say. I'm a fun drinking buddy. It's relationships. So, like I said, this one part of my solo career feeds this other thing that then feeds this other thing, but it's all relationship based. I was telling the story about when I went out and played with Richie Sambora, did some dates with him when he put out his last solo record, or maybe the one before his last record. And, I got the audition because I was proficient enough to make it past that 60%, but I got the gig because it was a cool hang. Like the audition, we didn't even play. I went to his house and we ate barbecue and kind of kicked it because, he's like, if you couldn't play, then you wouldn't be here. So I just want to be sure you're somebody that I want to be around. And
Right.
the portion of it that has to do with you being someone that people just want to be around is really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've hired people for gigs that weren't the best player for the gig, but they're just somebody's like, I can't wait to hang out with him for 8 hours while we, dick around and try to find cool keyboard sounds or drums, whatever. Like that's just a huge part of it.
Yeah. 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 Relationships are huge.
Yeah.
And you are incredibly personable. You have some of the best stories and stage banter, I think, around. There was
But it's just trying. The music, the more I do it, I realize that the music is just a vehicle for me to meet people and just sort of make the tapestry of my life a little more rich. The music isn't the end all be all. It's, giving me a space to tell stories and to, like I said, meet people and, hopefully spread some, this sounds incredibly hippie-ish, but, spread some sunshine. So a little joy where I can, and make people feel heard. Like that's an incredibly empowering thing. And so now, whatever this new phase of my career is, I'm really dedicated to doing that. And that doesn't mean that I don't make music, because sometimes in me making music, I think it makes somebody else feel heard, because they go, oh, that's a story or a type of expression that I feel too. So like somebody else in the world feels like that, and there's nothing more empowering than that. I mean, that's when you hear the first time I heard Super Unknown, I was like, oh, the energy in this record is something that I had in me too, and I relate to it. And I felt heard in listening to their music. So I'm just trying to be more mindful of hearing people.
Yeah. And what does the future look like now? I mean, I don't want to speak for you in terms of what the intent of sort of the, I saw you did the series at Hotel Cafe of kind of like, sort of commemorating kind of up until now, and then is the intent that you're not going to be doing any more solo touring, or what is sort of the future like for them?
I would tour indefinitely if everywhere I went people were in the room, but the harsh reality of it is I can fill some nights in LA, but I can't fill nights in LA, meaning lower Alabama. So it's like I'm too good to be playing to 15 people in Des Moines. I'm just not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
So that's one component of it. And the other part of it is I'm just like, I love being in the studio. That's my happy place.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm standing in the middle of a room full of musicians, and I'm kind of directing traffic, like, all right, well, you try this thing, don't play hi-hat in this part. You gotta, just sort of directing traffic. That's when I feel the most at home. And me doing so much solo stuff, I think people have a little bit of a difficult time figuring out, well, are you a solo artist? Are you a sideman? Are you like, what is it that you do?
Right.
I would do them all if I could, if I had enough work to do them all. So I'm the plan was to put David Ryan Harris as an entity away just to concentrate more on producing other artists, writing with other artists. And also, from a super philosophical point of view, David Ryan Harris music for me, I've made this thing where people expect a certain level of like a confessional kind of thing lyrically, and they expect a certain thing from me musically as well. And I'm starting to feel slightly boxed in by it because I don't want to disappoint my fans. And so I realized my friend Edwin and I call it my give a fuck-a-meter. It's too high. I created better art when I just didn't give a fuck. And like David Ryan Harris just cares too much. So I'm gonna put that guy aside so that I can do things that are a little bit more free artistically. So the plan was I was gonna do this victory lap tour, solo, electric or acoustic or whatever, record those shows, put out that live record of that stuff, and then kind of peace out. But then when the whole pandemic started, like the dates were supposed to be April, I moved them to July. It looks like July isn't going to happen either, so I'm going to move them to the spring. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm going to do some virtual shows on the dates that I was supposed to do the July shows. I'll probably put out a single or two between now and the spring when I go out. But the plan is ultimately I want to move into just helping other people kind of articulate their vision. I love producing and doing that stuff.
Yeah. What do you feel like is the sort of the pivot for people to make now that this is kind of going on? Like, presumably it's a huge adaptation that I think all of us are having to deal with in one way or the other. What do you think is like, what do you see as sort of the move here for artists to make if you were to advise them, given the circumstances of live shows being an impossibility?
Well, I mean, I think you just kind of try to figure out, you distill this down to what is the base ingredient of the exchange that is made at a live show.
Yeah.
It's like the feeling of community. It's the feeling of being sort of enveloped by the music from this artist that you love. And, just being able to kind of sing along. So how do, which of those things can we sort of re-engineer through this screen? And I think it's different for different people.
Yeah.
For me, I've spent many hours trying to make sure that my streams sound good, because a lot of times I see people that I love that I know are great guitarists, great singers, and it just sounds, I've done my 10,000 hours plus on showing up at a club and plugging in my guitar, and I know that if the monitor doesn't sound good, I know how to like make up for that in my brain, and I can triangulate it, and I'm cool because I've done enough of those to know. I haven't done enough of this kind of exchange to make sure that it sounds great. So like I've spent 40 hours sitting in front of this thing trying to figure out my rig. I'll make a little recording, video recording, listen to it back. Then you got to move stuff around because it's really kind of hard to tell on your own. So I think people got to invest in this being, this is the deal now. I mean, even if people are able to start going to clubs, I don't know that the public at large is going to feel comfortable being, pressed up against other people. So this is the communication medium now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, we have to, as musicians we don't have a real union, but we as a collective need to also remember that this does have value. And the more you give it away, the less value it appears to have. And we're already sort of in a season where I think music isn't valued as I think it should be, with the, Spotify and streaming payouts and that sort of thing. So, it's like I'm going to give some shows away, but at a certain point, I'm going to stop doing the thing for free, because this is how I feed my family. So if this is how I feed my family, I got to figure out a way to monetize it in a way that makes sense. And we as a block of people need to kind of, if I'm charging but everybody else is giving it away for free, then I look like the asshole. But we all need to figure out how to do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, it's really hard because certainly new artists, you're so desperate to get people to want to engage, and the temptation is to do it for nothing, not not looking at the big picture and seeing how it actually impacts the rest of the musicians, because now you've sort of recalibrated the expectation to free,
Right,
but
right.
once it's kind of like, I don't know, you're upset with your kids or something like that, and you go, to level 10, you can't, you can't graduate from there. You're
From
already,
there, right.
yeah. So it's a tricky thing. It's a
Yeah.
tricky, yeah. Well, last question, David, before we complete for today is, you're doing a lot of production and stuff like that right now, and that's kind of what you're moving into. Is there a couple of artists that you're working with and producing, or artists that you think should be on people's radar, that you think are really putting out great music that we should be checking out?
I mean, there are definitely people that I'm into, but oddly enough, someone asked me the other day if I found any solace or found anything that makes me, you know, feel good during this pandemic musically, and I just don't have space to like. The place I listen to music the most is in my car or traveling. When I'm home, if there's music playing, I'm usually making it.
Right.
Um, so there really hasn't been a lot of new things kind of coming up on my radar. There's this band in Nashville that I really love, the New Respects. Um, but I love to see them live, and they can't play shows. Um, like deep dives on artists that I love. Like I did one for Sly Stone the other night, and that was actually really good for me to kind of turn other people on to things that um, they didn't know, songs other than a or thank you for letting me be myself again. So I found, a great deal of joy in kind of deep diving on stuff that used to make me feel great when I could go wherever I wanted to go.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I've been getting into doing deep dives of isolated multi-tracks. of
Oh man, you know what? I'm so glad you said that. Sharky gave me this hard drive full of multi-tracks. I mean, like all kinds of stuff. I gotta pull those out. It's
Yeah,
great to pull records apart that way.
yeah, we talked about it when I was with him in Chicago. He did some videos for me at Chicago Music Exchange, kind of right before this stuff hit, and then
Yeah,
we spent another couple of days building a rig for him in Chicago while I was
yeah,
there. Sort of not planned, but it just happened that way because he was about to go do like a solo acoustic sort of, or not a solo acoustic, but like a blues thing. Like I think it was like a BB King tribute or something like that in New York, and Steve Jordan was organizing it.
yeah.
And so I needed a rig for that, and so we built it in short order in Illinois. And we were talking about multi-tracks, and I was sending him a bunch of, or we were like exchanging them in real time, where he's a big Steely Dan fan, and I had a bunch of Steely Dan multi-tracks, and so he was like listening to them. And what else did we get? We got into Slash and Appetite for Destruction.
Oh wow.
Those multi-tracks are brutal, man. You'd never think that those would work if you hear them by themselves. It's so bright. Like Welcome to the Jungle, it's just a 2K knife, like you can tell it's close mic 57 on a vintage 30. It's like upper mids into upper mids, just totally enveloped
Yeah,
in 2K, and it sounds crazy bad by itself, but in that track it sounds amazing.
I think I have some friends that call those that say that kind of sound is like those from cocaine ears. Like you lose that frequency doing lots of coke, so that tends to get turned up quite a bit.
Yeah, it was totally there. And then the other ones I've been getting into is a lot of like the early session stuff, like the early wet dry wet stuff from like Dan Huff and Michael Landau and stuff like that.
Right.
I got some of these old tracks from Bad like Man in the Mirror and I Just Can't Stop Loving You.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
and those are some really, they're pretty buried actually in the track because I listen to them by themselves and I don't really hear a lot of the guitar. But when you listen to it by itself, it's actually really, really great. So
Right. A lot of the Michael Jackson stuff, earlier stuff for me, those are revelatory sessions to listen to how dirty the bass is, or like how listen to any of these things on their own. They sound a little raggedy, but because they were done and the done in a room with a bunch of people playing, you don't have this like microscopic thing
yeah,
where a lot of musicians are playing all the instruments, so you do put a microscope on everything, so you got to fix every little thing. We end up with these sterile records, like those Michael Jackson records move and breathe because they're all of these like tiny imperfections that become not necessarily imperfections, they just become the things that actually glue it together.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've heard some cool interviews of like Nile Rodgers and talking about like how he recorded his guitar. When you listen to any of those like Chic or Sister Sledge or any of that stuff that he was playing guitar on, it's kind of, it's not that clean, even though a lot of it's direct. And he was kind of redirecting people to say, well, it was half direct because he'd have one side going direct into the 1176, and then he would have another side going into a 210 Vibrolux.
Right.
And they wanted there to be grit because if there wasn't enough grit from the guitar recording, he said you could never hear, because all the disco stuff had so much hi-hat in it that if you didn't have enough grit, you couldn't cut over the hi-hat very easily without bringing the guitar really far forward in the mix, which didn't allow it to groove as much with the disco stuff that was like really syncopated and all that stuff. So I thought that was sort of an interesting idea. And certainly a lot of the Michael Jackson stuff sort of kind of came or had some of that semblance of some of the disco rhythmically.
No doubt.
And I was talking to Paul Jackson Jr. the other day about that. And he said that all that stuff that he was using was a Rivera modded Fender Deluxe and Vibrolux,
All right.
and a Dynacomp. He said that that was even before the Bradshaw thing. He said, and it wasn't stuff on the rack; it was stuff that was on the floor. So all that, like PYT, is a Rivera modded Deluxe and a Dynacomp.
Dynacomp.
Yeah,
Badass.
so that's all you need, man. Just go
That's
get
it.
a 70s Dynacomp and you're there. And one of those 11-pound Rosewood Valley Art Strats.
Yeah.
Yeah, with
Sit
Bartolini.
down.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, David, this was a really a great time for me, and I appreciate you being willing to indulge all my questions about your gear and sort of the evolution of that, and then giving some advice to people listening to this that are either artists like you or wanting to be in a position that you're in, and sort of sharing these stories. I hope I didn't overlap too much in things that you've answered before, but I think that nonetheless it was fruitful, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, man, thanks for having me, and also, thanks on behalf of the community at large. You provide a pretty invaluable resource that I certainly didn't have when I was first learning to play guitar. You're always trying to get this thing in your head out. You have this tone or this thing in your head, and you any tools you can find to help you do that are just really valuable. You're helping people figure out how to tell whatever story it is that they want to tell. So, pedal freaks and pedal junkies, tone junkies around the world. Thanks for being an open book, and doing. You study stuff like you was talking about the NTK. I'm like, you know what? I don't care. Like, you care, so I don't have to.
That's a great way to put it. Well, I hope that one day we can use a rig of yours to tell a story to another group of people, and whatever that may look like, because certainly during this time, although I can't do the video with you there, presumably we could still figure out a way to work together on, I don't know, studio board or something like that. So.
I would love that, because the one I have now, I'm like, well, this is my studio board, and it will never have to leave my house, so it is jam packed.
Yeah, we can just put a bunch of those Expression Digitech pedals in series, and
love it. I mean, they have other ones like They did one for Hendrix. They did a
Yeah,
Clapton one, like a Crossroads.
Crossroads. I remember it was yellow.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that one. Well, I
But
mean,
this one is the one. Don't mess with those. Those are I think the other ones are terrible.
yeah. Well, if the distortion's a 6 or 7 out of 10, you might need to go for it.
That's true. That's true.
If you remember in Tommy Boy, a 6 or 7 out of 10 is a D plus, and he used to say that's not a grade they like to give out. They like giving out D pluses.
That's right.
So, yeah. On that note, I look forward to the possibility of working with you on one of these things. And again, I appreciate everything you do, and I'm so glad that you came on.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right, see ya.
Peace.